Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this evening at the Gnomon School of Visual Effects, Games, and Animation. We're streaming live from Hollywood tonight, so hello to everyone watching on live stream and Facebook Live as well. We're happy to have you all with us for this very special game artist panel. So tonight we've brought three talented artists, lead artists from Insomniac Games to the Gnomon stage for a discussion on how to become a better game artist. On that note, I'd just like to shout out to all our awesome Gnomon alumni working at game studios around the world. So we have graduates at Insomniac, also Naughty Dog, Santa Monica Studio, Blizzard, Treyarch, EA, Riot Games, Infinity Ward. The list is pretty endless. So super proud of all of them if any of you guys are watching online. So let's introduce tonight's speakers. So from your right to left, we have Brian Weiser, a lead animator at Insomniac Games. Brian's career has taken him on a crazy ride through feature films, TV, tech, and games, and he currently spends most of his days consumed with cinematic visual storytelling for the greatly anticipated Spider-Man game. Prior to that, he worked on Sunset Overdrive and previously served a variety of animation roles for the likes of Google, Sony Pictures Imageworks, EA, and many more. So let's have a big round of applause for Brian. Next to Brian, we have Jason Hickey, a lead environment artist at Insomniac Games. Jason's worked at some of the finest independent studios, including Frontier, Crytek, and now Insomniac. Oh, including a brief stint at Sony as well. And he's currently, of course, working on Spider-Man 2. His previous roles have included lead artist on Rise, lead environment artist and assistant art director on the PlayStation VR Worlds, and senior environment artist on Connect Disneyland Adventures. He's talked about environment art at GDC, FMX, the Develop Conference, and the BFX Festival, so we're in good hands tonight. So let's have a round of applause for Jason. And last but definitely not least, we have Gavin Golden to Jason's left, lead character artist at Insomniac Games. So Gavin's also working on Marvel's Spider-Man and previously contributed to Sunset Overdrive 2. Before Insomniac, he was lead character artist on BioShock Infinite, which is super cool, and a character artist for titles including Dead Rising 2, The Bigs 2, Dragon Age, and many, many more. Gavin's also the host of a character art podcast, which you should check out, and he's a published author of various tutorial books. He's worked on multiple articles for 3D World, 3D Artist, 3D Total Publishing as well, so lots to check out from him online. So let's have a round of applause for Gavin, too. And moderating tonight's panel, we have Ray Cuevas, awesome admissions recruiter here at Gnomon School. As admissions recruiter, Ray travels to high schools, community colleges, and trade shows to educate prospective students about Gnomon's academic options and provide information about careers in the entertainment industry. Ray's also an illustrator and concept artist, and he worked as a graphic designer before joining us here at Gnomon. So let's have a round of applause for Ray for moderating tonight's panel. So before we get going, I just want to thank our event sponsor, Lenovo, as you can see, for helping us to bring these free events to you. Tonight's presentation is powered by Lenovo and Intel technology, which our students also use here at Gnomon. And for those attending here on the stage, we have a special 20% discount code for all the Lenovo ThinkPad P series and ThinkStation products on Lenovo.com. So the offer's good till September 30th, and it's exclusive to you guys, just to our event attendees. So if you want to take advantage of that, just let us know if you missed it, and we can share that with you. We'll have time for some audience questions towards the end of the night, and we have some Insomniac goodies, which you can just see on the table right there, to incentivize you. So the first 3 people to ask a question tonight will get a little goodie bag. So just make sure you wait for the microphone before you ask your questions. So that it's purely so that our live stream viewers can hear you. Otherwise, it's just silence to those guys. And yes, for those watching online, you can ask questions too. Please do so on the live stream live chat or on Twitter using #Gnomon. Facebook Live viewers, it's really hard to follow your questions on there. So please make sure you tweet or live chat to make sure your questions received by the team. And we have 2 one-month subscriptions, courtesy of the Gnomon Workshop. training library up for grabs today. So we'll raffle one to a lucky stage attendee, and the other one will go to an online viewer. So to enter that online, please simply share tonight's live stream event URL on Twitter using hashtag Gnomon, and we'll select a winner at random at the end. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed tonight's discussion. I'm super excited. And if anyone would like to tour the campus after the event ends, just let us know. We'll gather over by the side tables around 9:30 or so. So let's have another round of applause, and we'll hand over to Ray.
All right. Thank you, Lynette. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, and for those of you joining us on live stream. So just to start off, can we get a brief introduction as to who you are, what your roles are, and if you can tell us about some of the key projects that you've worked on?
Sure. I feel like Lynette kind of stole my thunder here a bit. Well, that's okay. Yeah, my name is Gavin Goulden. I'm currently the lead character artist on Spider-Man. I joined Insomniac during Sunset Overdrive. Prior to that, I was on BioShock Infinite, Biggs, everything that Lynette said. But my main role is to manage my character team, which is about 8 people, handle some outsourcing stuff as well, and communicating with design, animation, sometimes environment, though. It's not always roses. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yes, so I'm Jason Hickey. I'm the lead environment artist, and as it's all been said before, but I guess I worked on a few titles that are day one launch, so that was kind of interesting. Rise Son of Rome for Xbox One, and PlayStation VR Worlds for PlayStation VR.
Cool.
And done a lot of different types of games. I worked in film as well. And I actually we were talking about this earlier, started in classical animation, so you never know where you're going to go. I have a team of about, 30 odd people that I manage. We do outsourcing and all of that stuff as well.
Cool.
And I'm Brian Weiser. I'm the lead cinematic animator on Spider-Man. Prior to that, as again Lynette said, I worked on Sunset Overdrive. And over the years, I've worked on gameplay animations, cinematic animations, and I've kind of bounced around. I started in games, spent a number of years doing that. I moved into tech for a little while, working on trying to create a virtual world in the Bay Area, which was an interesting experience. Spent some time with my own studio and outsourcing to the likes of Microsoft and Google and many other larger companies. And then got back into games after doing some work in films, and now I'm on Spider-Man. I manage about 10 people on my team. The animation team is roughly 30 internally. And like I said, or like Lynette said in my bio, most of my time is spent communicating with these guys about how we can best present the story material that we have for us.
Cool. So Gavin kind of delved into this a little bit, but can you go in a little bit into your key responsibilities on your day-to-day at the studio?
Sure. Just work down the line, I guess.
Whichever.
Sure. Yeah. So the day-to-day is really trying to keep. It's a mixture between keeping the machine running sort of thing, like making sure my team's unblocked, making sure they have the information that they need, making sure that we're hitting like our quality bar, hitting aesthetics, and then communicating with our other departments to make sure that they get what they need. So, if design needs a certain enemy created for them, making sure that we're getting all that information that we need, so that we're hitting all those like checkboxes. Then beyond that, it's making sure we get the technical requirements for like our rigging team, our character TDs, making sure that animation's happy with topology. Well, as happy as an animator can be, but making sure that that our topology is fine, that everything performs the way they expect, addressing any needs that they have, and things like that.
Very cool.
I'm gonna get there
Sure,
first.
go ahead. We'll just continue the row here. We'll switch it up.
My main responsibility, so I suppose for Gavin and Brian's teams, they're quite interlinked, and there's a very complicated pipeline that a lot of people need to look at from very early to very later on. The difference with my department is it's mostly about working with design, the level design, the implementation of the core mechanics into the game. So even though it may seem as a lead environment artist, my job would be to look at the composition of the scenes, it's actually mostly communicating with the design team to make sure that when we start production, everything is as ready as possible to just like let the artists do their job and not. I don't know if we can talk about, but the idea of feeding the beast, like I need to feed my team. There's a lot of mouths to feed, and I need to make sure that they keep work coming. So that would be my main role. And then setting up pipelines to make it easier for myself to do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, generally my day-to-day is I'm reading scripts, working with the story team to try and identify how we can bring their words to life. But in addition to that, we think a lot about cinematography. That's probably the biggest thing that I'm passionate about these days. Animation is still fun. And then there's a lot of problem solving. I mean, oftentimes I'm spending days talking to Gavin and Jason about how we can realize what's on the page and what we all need to do to collaborate to unblock our team and keep moving. And as Jason said, feeding the beast is a real thing as a lead. Like we make every effort to make sure that nobody is ever idle, but the way that scheduling works and the way that just tasks are distributed, sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes you need to stay out ahead of your team and you need to make sure that they either have the quality bar they're aiming for, and if they're not hitting it, you need to make sure that you maintain that. And then really try and unblock them and keep identifying ways to keep the whole team moving forward to the common goal.
I think there's like a defensive element to it as well, like trying to figure out the priorities of requests from other teams and, in a way, protecting your team or protecting your schedule and making sure that people aren't getting overloaded, that scope isn't going out of control, and that you're not basically signing up for something that you can't, cash out.
To add to that, it's to keep artists creative. I've found that, and it works for me as well, is to remove stress. And having lots of people who, even with their best intentions, are kind of barking and snapping at your team from lots of angles, just makes people feel stressed, and then they can't do their best work.
Absolutely.
So a part of being a lead is creating this kind of barrier, knowing when to let people in. You don't want to wall off your team, but I think that's the sort of the difficulties. The hardest part is how do I keep the team engaged with the rest, my team engaged with the rest of the team, but also not feeling under too much pressure.
Gotcha. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of communication, not just between you and your team, but also you and the other teams in order to keep that going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the three of us are regularly communicating about anything our team may be going through. I mean, there's a good line of dialogue between all of us and all the other leads.
Where things haven't been going swimmingly with maybe environments aren't providing assets for animations on time, and it's just like making sure we meet regularly to identify how, if we are becoming a bottleneck, how we can push that information sharing onto maybe a senior or just everybody. What will work and what's risky. So yeah, cool. It's never the same. Like every 2 weeks, every milestone certainly, the whole interaction seems to just shift. I don't know if it's the same for characters, but for me it is. You're just like solid.
Consistency all the time. Never deviate.
Well, I think just what isn't said is we're always also trying to challenge each other. Like, with new ideas in the cinematic, I might go to Gavin and ask him if there's a possible way for us to make this character in a slightly different way, or with Jason in environments, and vice versa. They come to us with interesting challenges and how we need to work with them.
Interesting opportunities.
Yeah, that's how I should look at it.
Very cool. So now you're all in, lead positions, so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. I would like, however, to just step back for a second and kind of look at your career paths, find out how you got to be where you are now. Can you talk about that?
I can start. So I studied fine arts initially, and I knew that I wasn't the next great painter, so I looked at the computer as a possible medium to help grow and actually get work. And that led me to animation. And the first day that I made something move, I was blown away. I mean, we were just talking about this backstage, but I was a giddy little kid, like trying to show everyone this little ball that's bouncing on the screen. So after that, I ended up kind of finding games as an opportunity and worked on a couple of sports games. And as I said earlier, I then was recruited to work on a virtual world project, which, for better or for worse, it was a good experience to spend some time trying to create content for the tech community in the Bay Area and just live that experience. And then over the years, like we talked about before, I had, for the longest time working in games, I had held feature films and that level of animation is something I always wanted to get to. And then ultimately, I spent a couple of years working on VFX for films, and I enjoyed it. And the people were very much the same people that I've worked with before. It wasn't really a major transforming experience, but I realized I enjoyed game development even more. I missed, which I don't know if you guys ever felt this, but I missed the problem solving that we have in game development. I missed the opportunities to be creative that you have in game development. I mean, when you work on a film with hundreds of people involved, it's the director's vision, and you're trying to realize that. And I'm not going to say that animating a shot in a film isn't fun and satisfying. It just, after a while, it became a little boring. You know, I clean up one shot, make that pretty, and then I get another shot I'm going to make pretty, and I know I'm going to get 5 more that I'll make look good. But I didn't have the opportunity to really broaden my skill set. And then after, I'm kind of not going chronologically through my career, but I spent some time with some friends. We started our own business, like I said earlier, and that was an interesting challenge in its own right, where we were creatively providing content and services to companies big and small in the Bay Area and the Seattle area. And then I got back into games and found my way to Insomniac after some time at EA, and I'm back where I love. I mean, I really feel like my short period of time in films has taught me that I enjoy that career, and I would like to spend more time working on that, but games is where I feel like I excel, and I really enjoy day-to-day the challenges that we have. And I enjoy working with these guys. Like, I think one of the things I noticed in games is, in films, is that there wasn't as much of an opportunity for someone in our level to creatively impact the bigger picture of a product, where we have that opportunity with Spider-Man and everything we've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I ended up staying in games. It's the same thing. I got into games because I basically gamify everything. Like, I'm one of those people who just, any situation, I'm already OCD trying to make it into a game. You know, drinking games especially. That was my forte. I'm Irish, so, you know. But so me and my twin brother used to write tabletop role-playing games, and we used to make computer games on paper when we were a kid. I don't know if they're still a thing, probably not. But my brother would draw like the whole platforming level and cover it up with a piece of paper, and I'd have a little cutout with ammo, and it was a little sprite game on paper, and it was turn-based. So we used to do that when we were like 7 or 8. And then...
That explains a lot.
Yeah, I know, it explains a lot. And then played like, you know, Dungeons & Dragons and all that stuff for the rest of my life. So I kind of wanted to do art, and I tried it, and I tried film, and it was so boring. I know I shouldn't say that, but it was so boring. I was like an extra on a set, and I was sitting there for 8 hours in a bus waiting for my food. I was like, no, just go back to the restaurant, serve. I served Kate Blanchett in a restaurant that very night. But anyway...
And Kate was the producer on a video game, and that's how you got your
and
first
that's
job.
how I got my job. And basically, I went to do some fine art painting, and then I went back to games because I didn't really know what to do. And I was lucky because they were saying, it was independent studios. So I've had more success with working for independent studios, and I think a lot of that freedom that we have at Insomniac, and it's not like everything's great, but I really do love working at Insomniac. In other studios, it's sometimes you don't have the control, and independent studios, you're much more likely to have control. So you're making a big, huge game like this, like the director is not going to see everything. There's just no way until we ship. So we have to make good decisions based off the direction. So blabbering, but that's why I'm in games.
And here you are.
So for me, I think I have a similar path as both of these guys, but have done some things that I wouldn't recommend to the room. So I always wanted to make games, a lot like Jason. I modded like Doom and like Unreal and like Wolfenstein and all that, and also did like my own like XCOM maps and stuff, and like trying to make a game on paper and not realizing that I'm doing that. But at the time, like there was no Gnomon, there's no polycount, there's no ArtStation or anything like that. So really everything you learned was just absolutely new information. Like there's no, resources out there.
Mm-hmm. Back in the old days.
Back in the 90s. I really thought that I had to take fine art and then take animation, and then I could make games. So basically 9 years of education or something like that. So I started applying to a fine art school. Didn't get accepted because I'm a terrible artist, and really like my portfolio of like drawing like comic book characters and game maps and stuff didn't really wow them. So I literally, bad choice number one, literally like took an ad from the back of a magazine that was like a digital animation college and just phoned them up and asked if I could be in, and they said yeah, and I gave them money and took the class. So after a year of doing that, realizing that it wasn't really working out, I dropped out and moved across the country, threw all my stuff on a train, and because it's the 1900s apparently, and I don't know, I had a fear of flying at the time or something. But yeah, I went to Vancouver and I lived there, and I did like work on my portfolio while I was like a line cook and stuff like that, and eventually landed a job doing pixel art. So I was making pixel art for the like Motorola V300, which is probably older than most of the people in this room. But it's like one of the like the flip phones and like around the time like Razor before iPhone and stuff like that. So I was making like 8 pixel by 8 pixel shoes for like a matching game, and like little rubber ducks and Scrabble tiles and stuff like that. And eventually just like worked my way up to being like a character artist. I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is that I had no idea how to get into it. So I basically just kind of fell out of the tree and hit every branch on the way down until I had a portfolio that was worthy of an independent company.
So you have it, guys. That's all you need to do.
Yeah. So everybody, leave now. No.
Got the secret right there.
Make many mistakes early. That's my lesson, I guess.
Gotcha. Very cool. So we're here to talk about how to be better game artists. I mean, that's the title of the panel tonight, I think.
Something like that.
And thinking like game designers can help us get better at doing that. So all of you have been working in games for many years. Can you tell us if and how you've witnessed a divide between game designers and game artists in any of the projects that you've worked on?
I could start with that. So it depends on the studio. It depends on the structure that's established. Ultimately, in my opinion, we should all be collaborating, and I think all departments in game development should be challenging each other. All the way up to the director level. The director of engineering should be challenging the director of design to create the best product possible. I have experienced in my career studios where engineering and art were relegated to a service industry to design, and that was a source of conflict for me at the time. I definitely pushed back, and it was not what they wanted, and it's challenging. I think the best studios have no divide. That there's this openness where people are collaborating and everyone is excited about the same thing, and that is the goal. And as you describe it as a divide, I don't see that as a negative thing. I mean, we're all thinking about games or what we do in different ways. I mean, I come to a feature with the idea about how the character will move, where a designer may come to this feature trying to identify how the player will experience that character I'm making. Again, I think it comes down to the studio you're working in, and I think it also can be based on the designer you work with. Some are more open to constructive criticism and feedback and collaboration where others are not. I don't know, what do you guys think?
So for the divide, especially for a character artist, I feel there's like just naturally a stigma that character artists are removed from the game development process, only because environment, it has to be like lockstep with design all the time. And animation is basically like, not a service provider, but
involved.
you're very, but character art can kind of hide in a cave for like a month and just make something, like work on it, and then just like present it like magically, and that's bad. And like that's kind of something that I'm actively trying to not have on my team. And I feel like even like group play sessions or even like email lists and stuff, like just trying to communicate more throughout the team helps break down that divide and makes us not be cave-dwelling artists or something. Yeah, I mean, just kind of having somebody that would naturally be introverted and quiet and just working on their own stuff, looking at the purpose on like why they're making something and who would be handed off to, and like how their work actually plays into the bigger picture, and also helps them make better choices for the work they're doing. But yeah, I think for the divide, that's what I've seen, is that it's very easy to become insular.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen a divide grow. So as as I said before, and you mentioned it there, Gavin, is that my team, like environment and lighting and level design are the same. So despite what people think, basically the delivery is the same. So it's hard to be too divided, but I have seen, so when the divide happens, it's more obvious, at least for me. Just in the character defense, I think a lot of people who don't deal with character art don't understand a lot of it. From an environment point of view, you can do stuff and iterate as you go, but characters normally, especially as things get more realistic and have to be better quality, you can't just dump them into the game all the time, because it just breaks the game. So a lot of the stuff has to go behind closed doors. And in a way, cinematics as well, as they, depending on the tools you have, of course, but they tend to have to be in a little other place. So it's easy to say, well, why isn't it in game? But there is sometimes.
And it has to go through another step just to get into game. You know, like we will have to go through a rigor or character TD or whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it.
One of those technical people.
One of those insanely intelligent people. To actually get it working in game. Otherwise, it's just like a character T-posed all the time, right? So I think it's kind of it. There's always like a delay from my team's work to actually being running around in game.
And then from the actual impact of high quality assets on realistic games, for me, it's the biggest impact on how design works with departments, because all of a sudden the environment art pipeline, until a lot of the outsourcing tools and Substance and stuff came online, became very close to the character pipeline, especially if they were animated, in terms of the amount of quality and density, which means that the artists are spending more time, on the assets and less time working with the designers. Also, because the project size has exploded, because the amount of content needed and the amount of detail in it means that the communication breaks down. If you have 4 people on a panel, relatively civilized, if everyone here was talking at the same time, it gets much more difficult to communicate. And that's what happens on game teams. So that's where the divide happens. And if you don't have leadership who, like maybe even beyond our level, who are trying to force teams to keep communicating, or finding tools like Yammers or Trellos or these kind of tools that help facilitate communication when people can't just lean over and say, what do you think? You know? So I think the team size and the quality of the visuals has affected that collaboration in a way.
Gotcha. Do you guys have any key strategies, to deal when you see those divides happening, whether it's in your teams, between your teams, or between your teams and the designers?
So for me, it's lead by example, and that sounds really pompous, but you've got to work with the people the way you'd expect your team to work. So I work with the lead designer, Cam, or one of the other senior designers regularly to figure out what we need to do. And I'll also work with the level designers, like I'll go to their desk. As I said, I spend more time with the designers than I do with the artists. So by the time the designer then, and this is just my part, obviously design has to do something too, but by the time the designer, I don't work on the level anymore, the designer's already used to talking to art, and then they'll replace me with the level owner. That's kind of my strategy. The ideal thing is that people work together right from the beginning, but once you're in the beast of production, you can't always just say, hey, experiment for a while you need to make 100 assets for the level. So that's the strategy.
Gavin?
Yeah, I'm about the same. I mean, as simple as it sounds, just getting people to talk to each other is like a huge step in breaking down that wall, like having an artist talk to an animator or talk to a designer or anything like that, and just putting a face to the person that is getting the work down the road, really helps for sure. I mean, it's kind of similar to your case, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think communication is important, especially because the way you described, we can all be siloed, and I can spend days just working with the animators and only thinking about movement. But I need to be able to communicate effectively with engineering, with designers, with Gavin and Jason, and understand where they're coming from and their needs and what they need in the game. The other thing I think that's important, and I don't know if it quite answers the question, but remaining positive is really a huge trait, a huge advantageous trait for someone to have in development. Because, I don't know, all of us have been faced with long hours before. I'm sure you guys have in anything that you've done. And it's really easy to be positive about what you're doing when everyone's excited about it. But a lot of people, or some people, tend to fall off the rails and get angry and negative when you're challenged with high stress environments. And I've worked with both. I've worked with people that are positive and it's easy to give them feedback or it's easy to work with them. And I will forever work with them again and try to hire them in new studios. And hopefully they would do the same with me. I've also worked with others that have been disruptive and have actually brought the team down. And I mean, while this seems obvious, it's not always easy for any one of us who think of ourselves as positive people to remain positive in the face of our dreams being crushed on a project, or this thing that we wanted to make is not going to get in. But I don't know. It seems very simple, but I think that is incredibly important. Like your attitude is a big thing when it comes to making your way through development.
Yeah. In terms of actual strategies, and I'm not sure, is there any leads in the room? No. Okay, well, yeah, there's one. But like, if you're doing it yourself and you're finding that you're working on your own artwork or something, you're working with a project with friends, an easy way to see how you can become siloed is to have to-do lists that are separate. So if you've just got your own way of working and it's not exposed to the way other people are working, that is so easy to go into the classic. I've talked to you guys before about this, but my job is the hardest job on the team. Like that's everybody thinks that their job is the hardest, and it's nearly always not you. It's probably a coder sitting in rendering somewhere, just in the dark on their own.
It's QA.
Way to
Or
generalize
QA,
that.
yeah. But so once you realize that your job isn't the hardest, then you start to build empathy, and all the strategies for communication are about building empathy with the rest of the team. So if you're going to employ any tools, analyze them, see if they build empathy. So for example, Trello as a Kanban board style, you can see the amount of work easily. You can see how much work another person has. If multiple disciplines are using it, you can see, if you set it up the right way, that they can't work on something until you've moved that over. So you're building empathy. So all the strategies should be about, why is their job difficult? How can I make their job less difficult? But not also make my job too difficult. So you don't want to do the work for them, but you want to enable them to do the work. And I think that's, just being nice. I mean, it's basically, if it comes down to talk to people and respect them.
Be a
Seems
decent
obvious.
human being.
Don't be
Seems so obvious.
Yes. So Brian kind of mentioned about kind of having your dreams crushed in your production because you're working on something that you really like. Has that ever happened to you guys where you've maybe been in the middle of production, there's something that you're working on, you're really digging, you want to get a certain result or something, but maybe there's no time or anything. Has that ever happened to you, and has that landed you in trouble?
I feel it's just
Do you
like
mean today or?
I feel like this is like the Ben Affleck gif of just like just staring. Oh shit.
Sad apple.
I'll answer that
do you
one
wanna-
first. Yeah. So when I was working on Rise, right at the end, my level that I had worked on was the York level. Nobody probably played it, but if you have, it's set in kind of England and it's all raining and muddy. Well, it's not raining. It was supposed to be raining. So I pushed for the whole project, like the whole project. It's going to be rain, it's going to be storm, lightning, and like 3 days before we were about to go gold, all the tech came in, and I had to go and try and convince the audio team. And I was like, hey guys, it's just rain. It's just a full screen effect and a rain shader. That should be easy. And then he proceeded to like scream at me with all the reasons why adding, rain in a level, for an audio pass is not just trivial, like turn on background noise. So that was a bit of a dream.
I bet that's something you always have to consider too, right? How it affects the other
it
teams.
shows that because I didn't know, I didn't really think about that department at all before that. I was just like, yeah, they'll do it. Audio generally work very
Push
hard.
that rain button.
Yeah. So that was a small thing, but an example of not being prepared can be, We're pretty prepared now to get our dreams crushed, right?
I feel nothing.
Go ahead, guys. I'll be last.
I'm trying to. Is this the dream that's being crushed right now? Speaking second was always my dream. Man, what dream can I talk about being crushed? So I think mine would be one of my jobs that I had years and years ago was working on a cyberpunk shooter. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with my work or not, but I've got a huge love of 80s sci-fi cyberpunk kind of stuff. So this was the perfect project for me. And we worked away like 2 years on it. Got to make a bunch of cool stuff. Project eventually got canceled, and the company basically went from being this like cyberpunk shooter game to being like a porting company for EA. And even though it's like irresponsible to say it, but I'm like, no, fuck this, I'm done. And I quit because I didn't want to port to like the Game Boy at the time. And it was just like a complete 180 from like this amazing dream project that like I absolutely loved to something that at the time, because I was young and full of myself, now I'm old and full of myself, but at the time was like, no, I can do better than this. Just walked away.
I think
Happy ending.
I think you make an important point. Like if you are in a production career long enough, you will have a lot of your work that just never sees the light of day. It's just the way it goes. Gavin's had projects crushed or shut down. I've had that before. I think the one anecdote that I can bring up, though, is I was working on a Medal of Honor game for EA, and we had this cinematic where it was just the arrival of a massive army hitting a beach in Somalia, and this big thing that I prevised and put all together, and I was really happy about. And we spent months working on this. We'd done mocap, we had gotten it all in, everything was working, and ultimately, the cinematic and the whole level, particularly the cinematic, was removed because we arrived at a point where our technology was unable to provide us appealing water, similar to the rain issue that you had. And while we were assured that this wouldn't happen, we ended up throwing this whole scene away that I spent a number of months on, and many other animators spent months on, and that was pretty crushing. But I think the thing that I was able to accept, at least, is that it wasn't like a lot of things that a lot of the aspects of production that I've had kind of taken away from me are sometimes for good reasons. Like we don't have the bandwidth to do this, or we don't have the technology to achieve what you've put together. I'm sure some of this cinematic was my fault, where I'm putting cameras right at water level and looking at boats, but I wanted to make it cool. That's kind of the bane of this existence for Jason too. Sometimes too. We're working on a high-end title, and we want to get close to things. But yeah, I think that was probably the hardest one to accept, that we felt it was a big showcase moment for our game and just got ripped out at the end.
Mm-hmm. I think there's like, probably from all the dreams being crushed, though, there's at least like a lesson from this. I mean, you kind of realize that you can't just add rain.
Yeah.
You can't just add rain.
You just can't do it.
Can't do water.
Yeah, I mean, like
Unless
for me, even though it sucked at the time, like I immediately went from that to freelancing full time, and realized that, like, after a while, I'm taking jobs to pay the bills, and it's not all like rainbows, you know what I mean? So, I mean, the company that I walked away from was in the exact same position, right? Like, this is kind of what I learned over time, even though I reacted badly.
Well,
time.
I'd say like as well, the crushed dreams it's just not like, if you're not getting your dreams crushed, and that sounds really awful, but you're probably not doing art. Like, I mean, you're always going to be disappointed with the level, you're delivering. And the thing about working in a place where you should probably think about not working there is if you feel that the impact of that decision is just really against what you, like, not the 2 months or the 2 years on a project, but actually the principles of what you want to do with your art. Because, games is games, so, it is a commercial medium, but there is an aspect of the art that you want to push in yourself, and there is a lot of energy you need. So you need to pick the place that when your dreams get crushed one day, then the next day you get it, like, a dream come true. Right. Like in this game, like, you can imagine if I asked all of you and all the internet people at home, like, what would you want to do with a Spider-Man game? You'd all have thousands of ideas, and not all of them are going to make it into the game, So there's always new stuff to try and keep adding. That's the way I look at it. It's just like, keep trying. I think that's a really good thing that I've learned, actually, is that people in good game studios really appreciate just constantly trying to come up with stuff that makes it better. And in the bad studios, they sort of put you down for interfering. So if you're in a place where they're putting you down, get out, go somewhere else, like us.
Maybe it's like a Rocky quote in there somewhere.
There's got to be at least an Irish Rocky quote in there somewhere.
Is there an Irish Rocky?
Looking at him. Are you going to ask me about Conor McGregor? I told you.
All that said, though, the dream crushing makes the moments that you get the thing you want that much more enjoyable.
Right.
Yeah,
Is there any moments like that? Have you guys had
Oh,
been
for
working
sure.
on a project where you had something that you really wanted and you got it to happen or to work for you guys?
Absolutely, yeah.
Very
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a handful of them we can list, but yes, it just makes it that much better when you know that this could have been cut or other things can be. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best. When another team says we can't do this, and you go, yeah, really, and then you do it, and I love that. That's because a lot of the time that's something to watch out for is when people will try to help your department or you as an artist by saying, oh, we're going to cut this stuff, and they don't know what work they're cutting. So often they actually can make more work for you, especially with cinematics, actually. Like, oh, what if we just do this other shot? And you're like, well, no. Or, so, yeah, communicate. Make sure that their dreams can come true sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of being a good, proactive artist, animator, or whatever, is like being able to solve that problem on your own. So if you're only ever being given a solution to something, you're never working those muscles that make you a better problem solver, which is the majority of your job in the first place, right? Yeah. So if, people are constantly trying to figure your problems out for you, then you're just kind of the service department.
Yeah, and that goes within the team as well.
Yeah.
Like if I'm looking in an interview or hiring someone, or if I can see in their CV or whatever that they're problem solvers, that's a huge boon for me. Like if I see someone has solved problems, but they haven't done it themselves, like they're not actively doing it, I can't afford to have anyone on my team who's not actively trying to solve those.
Doesn't have that mentality.
Yeah, you've got to have it. If you don't want to solve the problems, games is not for you because it's just problem. Like, it's interesting. It's just not monotonous. Definitely. Yeah.
That is a good point. I mean, we want to hire skilled people, but you also don't want to hire someone who's skilled but dependent on you to shepherd them all the way through everything.
Right.
Yeah. No way.
No way.
So cool. Let's say you get a new project. You're going to start working in a brand new AAA game. It's super awesome, super big. What are the first steps you take with your team to kind of prepare for this new project?
Okay. I don't know. Normally I panic a bit at the start.
Panic, number one. All right.
Yeah.
For character, I mean, I think we kind of come in a little bit later, only because we have to figure out like the world that it's in and stuff like that.
Never been the same. Like every single one is completely different. So
I
I can pretend there's a bunch of rules.
Yeah, in my experience, that's what's happened, but I'm sure it's not the way it always is. But I mean, for us, there's like the technical side where we'll have to figure out, the body types that we have in the game, scale, like what silhouettes work for like the different gameplay elements like combat, something like that, and then just kind of iterating on that. But a lot of it for like the narrative too is, how does it fit into the world? Like what stories are we telling in the game, and how do the characters fit within that script and that universe that like we're trying to create. Then there's a lot of technical stuff too, like what's our quality bar, like what do we have to do to hit that, like once you establish like an actual look, like figuring out the time frame for that, then figuring out how many of those things you can make for the next 2 to 5 years or whatever, so I mean a lot of it, the very first is the throwing darts at the board and just seeing what one hits, and then figuring out how to throw that same shot every time.
Yeah, for me it's the same as any project. Really, like I say a panic for a AAA because there's always a lot of stakeholders. So it normally takes a while to boil down what it is you're making, and that's the hardest part. So, but with any project, like if you're doing your own personal portfolio project or you're doing a AAA game, it's the same. You have to figure out what it is that everyone's trying to do. And then that, for me, leads to all of the technical and all of that. So, and I've talked about this before in some articles and things about boiling down the pillars. Some directors work with pillars, and some studios, so other people don't. But it's always good to have your own pillars, even in your own personal project. Like, even let's say I wanna show off organic sculpting. I want it to be, like cyberpunk or something, just like really simple things that can help you. Just organic modeling.
My feelings.
Before I ever remind you about that project.
But
Yeah, the one that got away.
hello. So I think, just like at the very start is you got to understand the project. So read everything, and then start asking all the questions, like every single question you can.
I think it's really interesting to hear your answers because it's so very different from mine. Like we think of movement and character and who he is and what they do, and for project after project, one of the things I love about being an animator is I get to immerse myself in research. So I spent a couple of years at EA working on a Medal of Honor game where we were working with Navy SEALs daily. We had them on site, and I would comb through all of the video footage and documentation, anything I can to understand what it's like to be a Navy SEAL and what they do. And I'm an artist. I'm never going to be anything like these guys, and I know that. And then, like Spider-Man, for instance, I spent like the first few days I got on this project, I just took Spider-Man and one of our enemies and just kind of did my own little shot just to explore how he should move, in my opinion, and then spend more time reading comics and just combing through everything that I could about the character. And then Sunset was another example where we had very distinct inspirations for where we want cinematography and storytelling to go. And I would spend days framing through Edgar Wright films or just countless other ways for me to identify what it is to move in this space and present characters in this space. And again, that's what I love about being an animator. I don't want to say I'm an actor because we're behind the scenes, but I like that notion that I can work on different projects and I can explore completely different disciplines and learn about them.
Well, yeah, that's interesting though, because
Like I don't think about the game as much because I know we'll get there. I think about the characters and the narrative.
Sure.
And, yeah.
No, it's an interesting point, and I guess you would do it. But I always write the story of the environment, like as if it's a character, or you know. And I think I got that from studying animation, maybe. Oh. So like I would never start building an environment until I know like who lived there, what was it used before, and you know what just happened recently. So I sort of do the ancient history, recent history, just now thing, that's how I approach that. That's the point, and then I'll do all the rough blocking out and stuff for the research. Yeah. But I think I do the same thing, just in a spatial way.
And I really enjoy that.
Yeah,
I think it's great to have fresh, different titles too. From Sunset to Spider-Man, they're just two very different things, and it was fun.
I found though that the thing with this idea of pre-production, you know. There's no such thing as pre-production in games. There's like a period at the start, and there's production. And maybe there's 3 people in a room in pre-production who go, "Yay, Spider-Man! Let's make that." And then it's like the whole team. And
But then there's 2 more, and there's 2 more, and it grows.
Yeah. So it's like pre-production is okay. We're building a game with New York. What should we do with it? Uh-oh. type. You know, and I'll ask my team then what they need, and. I'll try to give them some information, right. You know, fly the seat of your pants. But I think I remember talking to somebody working in film, in animation, 3D, and they were talking about, they only had 6 months pre-production. And I was like, yeah, well, we had 8 weeks. So, you know, for Rise or whatever, you know, so.
Yeah, I think there's like the misconception too that pre-production is like, there's a date, and as soon as it's done, it's like, we don't change anything.
Yeah, the game's ready at that point.
Yeah, it's like, we got it all figured out. But, I mean, for us, like for my team, I think we're always open to new ideas. Like if there's something that's like objectively better for the project, and we can do it without ruining people's lives, we do it, you know? So it's like that's, I think in the, like, idealistic world or something, it's like you'd have all of that figured out in pre-production. It's like there's no way, you know, especially when the lifetime is years long. I mean, you're going to figure out things way better, you know. And since like the things you make at the end of the project is better than the things you make in the beginning of the project because you figured it all out. It's like, well, you're going to take what you learned here and then redo this and then just start like matching matching it all together.
But that brings an important point. So, you know, when you're at the beginning and you get the idea for the game and everything, and you figure it out, for example, the design language or the story of the environment or the movement of the characters within the environment, how do you stay focused on that end goal, right? You've kind of figured this out. You're building this world, and production can be 2, 5, sometimes more years, right? How do you stay focused on getting to that end goal, you know, with what you've kind of researched and created as you go along the way?
I'll start on this one. I think actually the end goal is ever shifting. I think, you know, making games is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're not going to, like Gavin said, we will not have all decisions made by the time pre-production is over. And we will not be done making decisions 3 weeks before we go to gold. So I think while we want to have a cohesive vision and we want to try and strive for one thing, I think the exploration throughout the process, and as I mentioned before, I think everyone should be challenging each other on a development team. I think from that, new ideas will always arise. And the ultimate vision, I mean, at least in everything that I've ever worked on, it started as one thing and became something similar to that, but I believe became generally, or I hope this is the case, became better than what it was at first. And we've all arrived at new decisions. And I think it's less about, at least in my opinion, about remaining focused on the one idea and more about trying to take that and how do we turn this into something that is bigger than that one idea.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think for me, when I do the phase at the start, I'm not actually looking to prove out the end. Like, I'm just trying to boil it down to what it is that makes it good. So on Rise, for example, I didn't get to do. I went to Crytek to learn like all the latest techniques, and then I got made into a lead. So I was like, oh well. But I did get to make a couple of materials at the start before anyone had done any PBR stuff. And I made one kind of muddy material and some on a wood, and that's all kind of I made. And there was a load of other art direction stuff, but what I took out of just that asset when I was directing the rest of the team was, okay, so what about this asset makes it Rise? So it's, you know, it's a bit more wet. It's got more like life, organic nature to it. You can feel the surface of it. It feels gritty, you know. So I started to take that and then go, okay, well, what if we applied that to the architecture or the light composition, or, you know, so you can take, if you don't have a nicely made pillar for you, you can take something you like and then start expanding it and applying to other things. So I think it's making sure you identify at the start what is important to you, and then just like stick it in front of you, and keep reminding the team as well. You know, it's more important, I think, for yourself that you understand that thing and then you follow through. But like having one image or like, you know, one animation and expecting that to get to the end of the game, never happens.
Yeah.
Never.
Well, especially after what Gavin said, the first things that we always do are usually the worst by the end of the game, by the end of the development cycle. But go ahead, Gavin, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to reiterate what Jason's saying, like basically trying to have, you know, these core goals that you remind yourself of. I think it changes, obviously, based project on project, and could be really high level, right? Like on BioShock, it was everything being really story driven, right? So like, what's the story? It's like the mantra that we'd keep repeating. So every concept you'd make, every character you'd make had to tell this story within the world and be a piece to that puzzle, versus like, I don't know, man, it's cool. I just want to make something cool, right?
Yeah.
So like that doesn't really, you know, get us anywhere. And like, I think being able to put what you want to do into the overarching theme or goal like of the project will keep you focused. You know what I mean? So if it's like what's the story for Sunset, it was like be who you want to be, right? So it was like the end times and whatever. So whatever. But you know, that helped drive our vanity, like our creative character, like a lot of the environment art and stuff like that. So like a lot of the aesthetics came from that idea, right? So whenever you're making something, it's like, well, you know, does this fit like the fun end times? You know, like does this fit like that? Like, you know, this is my last time to enjoy my life. You know, like is it fun? And if it wasn't, then like, well, then why would I spend time doing it, right?
Yeah, you said something there that I think that's the crux of the whole, for me, what's important about sort of shifting. Like one of the advantages of having polycount and ArtStation and all of these ways of expressing your art is that you get to basically look at a beautiful stuff, but it is really nearly always completely out of context. And the flip side of that is that a lot of people are making stuff that is pretty, but it's not usable. At least it's not usable in a lot of games that I would make. So what you're saying, is it cool? Does it look cool? That is so not important if it doesn't hit what the message of the game, because we're not, like you were saying, you know, it's a marathon, but it's a team sport. You know, you said that before, where it's like, and it sounds cliche, but it is literally a team. Like everyone has to put the effort in. It doesn't matter if you do a beautiful asset if the designer doesn't use it in the right way, or if you break the gameplay. So I think what's really important from this, if anyone takes anything away, is that being an artist is like you're just a tool in the making of this art piece. You're just one like splash of color in it, and you have to work with everyone else for it to.
Well, yeah, you can't do it alone. Like I can't make a single cinematic without these guys. and without the things that your teams put together.
Yeah, and it's also about the ability then to understand what's important, so that everything that connects works together as well. I think it's often the case where artists will, in times of stress, will shrink back into a aesthetic role and rather than a game designer role. And nowadays, with all the new and evolving pipelines, that role of just pure artist is getting less and less likely. That's what you'll do. Like an animator will do maybe a couple of really cool scenes in Spider-Man, but they'll also do a bunch of just getting it to work. You know, like
Good point.
linking up moves and stuff that's not like, oh, portfolio, whatever, but it's way more fun for the player because those things are there.
Definitely. So there are, obviously a bunch of people involved in the production of a game. You have artists and programmers, directors, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anyone who you should be speaking to regularly to make sure that the art is working with the design, it's working with the code, it's working with the vision, and does the player expectations at any point play a part in what you're doing?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like player expectations, number one. Spider-Man, I can easily relate to it because I'm pretty sure I had Spider-Man diapers, and it hasn't ended. Like Sunset, like I joined Insomniac because I wanted to play Sunset. I'm a huge BioShock fan, all that stuff. So I think for me, it's like, is it fun? Will people like this? Is a huge thing for like decision making. For actually, I mean, obviously you probably shouldn't poll the audience on if you should do something in a game. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with like an 1,000-page Reddit thread or something. But I mean, for us, we talk to our character TDs all the time, animators, designers, and really whichever ones from like that department is going to own your work down the line. And then getting the information, it's usually me or the art director for, what something should look like, I guess.
Yeah, for me, so player, we talk about the technical and design side. For me, that's sort of, people can ask questions about it, but for me, the player expectation is really important because often in games there will also, it's a tendency to dumb it down a bit. And this comes from animation and film as well, where it's like, they will not understand the shot unless we sit, And often that is the case. People don't always catch things. But with environment, we get a great opportunity because we can put in loads of stuff that people don't read the first time. So I really enjoy working with, like when you're building the city, where we build an area, and it has a generic theme to it that's like, oh, it's identifiable as this area. But then there's also these little hidden stories and everything, so that maybe not every player will get it because they don't really care, but the 5% of players who play it that way will absolutely love that we put that extra effort in.
Right.
And that's what I'm really passionate about, being able to like get the player to feel like if they discover some kind of Marvel, Easter egg in the world that nobody's told them about will be, really, really cool experience. And I think people will feel connected to the game and every game because of that.
Definitely.
So yeah, I love that. I sometimes watch videos of the games to see, and people just storm past everything. So maybe it's a bit ego, but
Just every step is your time being wasted.
Yeah.
No.
Somebody will find it, though.
Yeah.
I think I'll just echo what they said. I mean, it's pretty obvious with cinematics that we're always thinking of the player and where we want them to look and the information we want to convey. But even in gameplay, we're always thinking about, the responsiveness of a singular attack move, or how will the player be able to understand the information that's on screen and respond quick enough, or working directly with design, iterating over and over and over again. I mean, the combat you see in this game is definitely taken a lot of work to get there, and it's through a lot of effort by many people, from engineers to programmers to producers to everyone involved, who have repeatedly tried to think about the player and how will they enjoy this moment, and if it's not enjoyable from our internal testing, then we might have to revisit it. We've had many abilities that the player can do on paper and is done in the comics that are challenging for us to build for the player. But it's, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm just echoing what you said, but we never stopped thinking about the player.
The new thing you said there that we didn't mention is usability. So even on your own projects, when you're working on something, just get people, your target audience,
Yeah.
to look at it. You know, feedback if it's just artwork, or play it. Ideally play it, and especially if people aren't experts. Like, you know, I would always ask a friend who isn't a 3D artist to look at stuff when I was doing it, because they'll just be really honest, you know. And that's the people you're engaging with. So with the internal testing that you were saying,
Yeah.
so we have, like, we play our own games, you know, every week. Then we have all the bigger tests that are done by distributors and stuff.
Right, and I bet, I mean, with working on something like this, where, you know, as a pre-existing IP, the pressure has to be on, you know, to meet that expectation of the players, right?
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No.
Everyone is
It's
so
not like anybody
easy to
loves
work
that
with.
character.
Yeah.
It's been a joyous experience from start to finish. You know?
Gavin actually also said something else about, like, you obviously don't want the entire world to design your game. You want to have a vision where you can vet those ideas. But I don't want anyone to think that, you know, a development team is entirely closed off either. I mean, if we see some common threads in NeoGAF or something like that, and it actually is applicable to the thing we're working on, we might try to integrate something like that. I've actually worked on that virtual world I talked about. It got to a certain point where our venture capital funding was running out, and for the failure of the company, I think, but they did start to listen to the community, and the community did kind of design the product, and it really hurt. But I think if you can pick and choose and engage the community, I think that's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, there was some stuff from E3. There was some, you know, change. Like they were talking about the swinging didn't feel right, and then there's been adjustments to that to try and take on the perception of the game. Awesome. It does play differently, you know, when you're holding the controller, of course, but you know, just to make it feel right, which is fantastic. I've never actually worked anywhere where they're like, everyone's saying on Reddit that this should be okay. Let's have a go. see if they're right, you know.
Gotcha. Very cool. So, how about challenges in your respective departments? Are there any main challenges or frustrations that you face in your day-to-day, respective to what each of you do?
I think it's,
There are some things that probably shouldn't be spoken about.
I'd say for me, it's all about expectation of what you want to do in a day, and if you don't get to do what you're expecting to do, that's the challenge. So as a lead, you know, you've got to be there for meetings, and sometimes meetings you don't really need it there. I mean, it does tend to be. Normally, as production goes on, it gets more focused, but that can be a real pain. The other thing is, you know, wanting to do actual work and artwork in the game, and it's just with like 25, 30 people, it's impossible really for me. I mean, so that's a challenge of
right.
Going, okay, well, I'll just always giving stuff away.
I think it's one of the harder parts of being a lead, and it probably changes like from company to company. But I find like the higher you get, well, you know, the more you advance in your career, so to speak, the further away you get from the thing that you actually trained to do in the first place. So I mean, like my actual art production has gone down, right? But the trade-off is that for being a lead, you can affect more people. So even though you're not personally doing the art, you're enabling a lot more artists to like get the job done and, you know, ideally make a better game, right?
Yeah, I just quickly on that note, like, so I rushed my career a bit with the lead thing. I was just like, I want to be an art director, you know, and I rushed. And it is careful what you wish for situation. Like, you can work in studios where you can get, you know, good money and good responsibilities, but not be a lead. So, you know, really think about whether or not that's something you want, because being a lead, I find it way more rewarding for me. But there are times that I'm like, I would love to do that, because I know other artists are better at doing my job than I am. So it's like, hey, cool, I'm going to find this person, and then I'm going to let them do really awesome stuff, and I feel good about it. But it's not easy. You know, it's a hard job to be able to try and manage quality control and manage people. So it's not for everyone. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think I could echo what Gavin said too. I think so much of what we do, I love making something move. And my day-to-day now, which I have no problem with, I like the greater visibility and greater impact that I have on storytelling in our game and where we're going as a team. But there have been occasions where I'm helping an animator finished their scene or there's a shot that needs help, and I'll come in on a weekend just to animate Spider-Man because it's fun. Because it's fun to make that character jump around and move, and I think that is a challenge sometimes. I think the other challenge that's really obvious is scope. I mean, I think there's never been a product that I've ever been on where parts of it were not cut by the time you finished it. And there's so much that we all want to do, and so many cool new ideas that come up every day. But getting that to fit in the budget for every team, from engineering to character art to environment art, and if you all agree that it's possible, then actually delivering within that budget is an immense challenge.
Very cool. So part of the drive, for me as someone who has done some game work, and for a lot of the audience members here, and a lot of them are Gnomon alumni, is wanting to work in games because we want to make games look awesome, and we want to work in awesome IPs like this and others. At what point do we get to start doing that, in production? At what point can we focus on making things look awesome?
Okay, well, I have an easy one because I have very strict rules. So once the design is done, you've got about 2 weeks to get the game to gray mesh. I call it gray mesh. It's not a gray box. So all the meshes in the game are roughly what they look like, and they're all gray. And once that's done and it's signed off, as long as it fits in the schedule, and each artist is control of their schedule. So I'm like, can you do it? And they say, yeah, okay, go to town. The only caveat is I know some studios sort of let people do that to the point where they can kill themselves with just working too hard. I will always manage or get someone else to manage that work so that it is achievable. So somebody says they have 80 man days or whatever person days work to do in 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, we got to outsource all this, and we're going to try and reduce scope here, and and then let people. So it isn't actually long into production as long as the base steps. Like, people talk about, like, every milestone, most people do a little bit of crunch, or I wouldn't even say it's crunch, it's just sort of making sure everything's fine, a few hours a week. But I want people to do that the first 2 weeks, because that's when, if you can set it all up at the start, then it's just plain sailing. You're just adding extra, and there's no surprises.
For character, we're our schedule's very predictable. Like, the way that I've kind of worked out the team is that after we've hit our initial visual bar, from there on out, it's really just like blocks of time, like per character, knowing that it will end up going in phases. So you end up having like these different approval phases that we have like internally. That'll be like whatever you want to call them. But basically, it's like presentable, really good, and you put in extra effort on this one kind of thing. But we're trying to prevent, because I think naturally everyone will want to go to 100, right? But the problem is that if you just go from like 0 to 100, from the beginning, you're wasting a ton of time because that could get cut. Things can change, design can change. So you got to kind of work in like levels, and get everything to like a presentable level. And then like a few months down the road, you'll come back to it, then bring it to like an actual, like if the game shipped right now, like if you, I don't know, fell asleep and you woke up and the game's out and it's like, oh God, like would this be terrible? Like no. And then from there it's polished. So it'll be like, really getting into the materials, getting like the finer details and things that some people will notice, but it's really like that extra like 10%.
So it's a lot about managing the expectations of your artists and also your everyone around you,
Yeah, definitely.
Gotcha.
I kind of have two answers. So one, if you're a new hire, we know that the people we're hiring for my team, the one thing I know they know how to do is animate. Like that's what we've definitely vetted. They may not be the greatest problem solver. They may not know our tools. So day one, we have them just animating, and we'll take baby steps, depending on the milestone, baby steps to get them to where they're problem solving and they're actually contributing on a broader scale. So I think if you're a new hire, you're creating art the first day you're on my team. But when it comes to creating game animation content, what I push for, even the cinematics as well, what I push for with my team is to block something in as fast as you can and get it into the game as fast as you can. Because as I described, the combat animations go through so much iteration. I've personally lost time trying to polish something and it gets thrown away just simply because it didn't fit the metrics that we needed. And I really need my team to, again, similar to what you guys just described, like basically get the animation in, work with design and engineering to vet that, make sure it's functional, and then we polish to what's in game. We don't polish to what's in Maya or 3D Studio Max or Lightwave, whatever you're using. Sometimes that gets lost and we have to keep reiterating that, because not to say that, we all want to make our stuff look pretty, and animators and character artists and environment artists, I'm sure, would all like to spend their time in Maya or their tool of choice and model the coolest thing that they want. But we will lose too much time doing that. So you have to, in my opinion, you have to polish to what's in the game and not what's in Maya or your tools that you work with.
And also, it's like if you have the 100% of the game, you know, maybe 70% of the game you polish and 30% you don't hit, you know, and you've got to, like those things. And there's several great games out there, you know, as examples where you see the start of the game and the middle and the end are really good, and the rest is sort of because it's that first impression that matters.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of dangers for having sort of letting artists be artists for too long. It's like noodling, so you just end up making it worse if you just keep going over it. And secondly, you grow. I can't remember what there's an effect. There's when you work on something for so long, you just have an emotional attachment for it that you can't really see past. So, and I imagine this must be more of a case for characters because you're working on one asset for like 10 years. Like, oh no! And they're like, no, it's cut.
Roughly.
Are you saying Gavin's slow?
Yeah. 10 years.
So as an environment, you know, you make like 100 assets at the same time. It's just like, ah! So if somebody says, kill that crate, you're like, yeah, all right, whatever. So, but there is something positive about that, and I think that what you guys are talking about helps. So you're like, I just do it and whatever. And you do so much stuff that if people cut it, it's okay.
Right. And so we've talked a bit about the importance of teamwork and communication, especially in during development. Can you share your thoughts on just basically how important that is to you within your team? How important it is to the success of the project to be able to communicate effectively and to work effectively as a team?
I think it's vital. I mean, again, like just going back over what I said, I think communication is just a huge part of the job. And I think it's also one of those things that you're not really told about, 'Cause I'm sure a lot of people think that if I get to make games, I get to be an artist for games or something, I just sit at my desk, and I listen to whatever music I want to and just do my thing all day. But I mean, you've got to get up and you've got to meet the other person that's getting your work, and you got to understand the intent of the level, the intent of the mission, and what you're actually doing, so it gives purpose to your actual technical job, so that you're not just sculpting away for hours on end.
I think your communication has to change too. You need to learn to speak clearly to people that may think completely different than you. The three of us all have an art background, but daily I'll be speaking with engineers who may not think of a feature in any way close to the way I'm coming to it. I think
that can't not be underestimated. There's a few systems for it, where they're common enough systems, but the basic, you've got people who like lots of details. You like people who want the whole team to just be harmonious and are afraid of conflict. There's people who are really conflictual and high energy. There's people who just want to be more center of attention, and none of them are bad. In fact, you need to have a mix. But if you don't know how to communicate to someone who needs a harmonious environment, then you're all like, where is it? I want it now. They're like, ooh, and it's not fair, right? It can be a really complicated thing. And it's, like you said, within a department, it can be quite similar.
Yeah.
But as soon as you step out to, especially direction, or you're managing above or managing upwards, or if you talk to project managers, they can be really different personalities. So,
I think even giving on a smaller scale, giving feedback to work too, being able to communicate properly, feedback on a coworker's work, is crazy beneficial. If you just like walk over to someone's desk and that sucks, or 17 is terrible, or whatever, right?
But that's your
what's
style.
So, yes, don't do as I say, not as I do. All right. But yeah, I mean, if you can't communicate with your own team, I mean, like no one will listen to you. You're just gonna end up getting like people frustrated, and you're just gonna be a locker room cancer, as it were,
yeah.
right? But I mean, even on a small scale, just being able to talk is like crazy important, you know, and like part of like going to school and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not the technical skill; it's the, you know, the other side of the job is just the politicking or whatever.
Well, it's important enough that we look at that as a valuable skill when interviewing. Like if someone is able to communicate cross-departmentally, that's huge for us because I can let that animator kind of roam free, for lack of a better term, but go solve problems on his own, and he'll find the right people to talk to, and he knows how to communicate to these people. And he's not someone that is just kind of closed off in his own silo of animators, and we just send the cool animations around in our group and doesn't really think of anything else. So I think, yeah, you can't underscore enough how important it is to be able to communicate with people that are not like you, and then just to do it frequently as well.
Yeah.
There's a few tips I would say that I've learned. If people are really, really reserved, like hit them up with a chat message first and say that is it okay if I come over? That's a good way to like make sure you're not interrupting them, especially with coders who are like have to be really focused on some,
Right.
or it could be animators or character artists actually who are very, very focused on, some specific thing. Environment artists tend to just have to because the distractions just change their work a lot. But also, like I said before, using something like Trello, so it's a way of communicating. What else is there? There's the weekly reviews, make sure like people feel comfortable talking about their work in a space, like on a big screen, just not really super critiques, you can do that too, but it's a separate reason for doing that. And then if you have stand-ups, that can work too, is integrating across departments. There are lots of different tools, if you're not a good communicator, that you can use to help communicating, or if your team don't communicate.
Learning how to fake an Irish accent is helpful.
Fake an Irish accent, yeah, even if you're Canadian.
Right. Well, I've trained it out. I trained it out though. Sorry. sorry.
Racist.
So building on that, not the accent thing, but just the communication and the skills needed to perform well in a team and perform well in this job. We have a lot of students here tonight, and I'm sure we have a bunch of students on live stream watching as well. I would like for each of you to kind of share advice as to, for those people who are interested in getting a career working in games.
Who's going first?
Whoever wants to go first.
All right.
Whoever has the best advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, if you're applying for games, to a job in games, the single biggest factor for you to get a job in games is if you have worked in games and know people and you've been good. It's not about that it's a lot about who you know, and I know this is like a pain, but that is the case. It's much easier for me to go off, like if somebody's really good and I trust them and I reckon then I'll bring them in for an interview and do the other process. So make contacts, be friends with the people in school and all the people you meet, and just, it's a little bit mercenary, but you sort of, you should probably like these people, otherwise you're not probably going to work in the right industry. And then it's all about portfolio and the presentation of a portfolio. Like I don't look at CVs, and I've never read a cover letter from start to end. I don't really watch videos. I just look at artwork, and I want to be able to see that what's hard about the thing you're trying to do. I want to see all the wireframes or whatever it is that you're trying to prove. Just prove it. I don't want to see a substance graph with loads of nodes. I don't care. But I do want to see how you would use it to blend or whatever, to show that you're trying to solve a problem. I would also look at every single thing that you're showing as an opportunity to show what makes you stand out. Not like, I'm really good at art. I'm really good at art, I'm really good at art, I'm really good at art, really, whatever. There's loads of people like that. So assuming that you're average to okay at art, can you show that you're solving problems? Can you show that you think games should be fun? Can you show that you enjoy working with other people? Is there any other information you can get in there? Because that will really help.
Yeah, really similar. I mean, for me, it's like always portfolio first. That's the first thing I'll click on before even looking at the name kind of thing. And really, I mean, I'm sure it's not really news for, new information, but like less is more, quality over quantity, really things like that. Like just keep working, keep finishing projects, and just replacing your worst piece with your best piece, right? And I mean, there's a ton of cliches, like you're only as good as your worst piece or something like that. But
Well, there's a reason they're cliches, though. I mean, they hold true.
Right. I mean, they're it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like in the work that you have as a character artist, showing that you're actually thinking about the game, like Jason's saying, and not just, hey, it's an anatomy sculpt or something like that. But you need to see that it's going to work into the engine. You need to see that you understand the technical
part like after ZBrush, you know, like that.
Right.
Like, there's a whole world outside of ZBrush that
Yeah, and
that's called a game engine.
Yeah, and you care about it as well.
And you were actually interested in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then showing like your design philosophy. So if you have like a really interesting silhouette for like an enemy, or like you're putting thought into like why you choose these elements on this character for that point. I mean, you don't have to write like actually don't write anything. But like just that you could see, like I can see if like you had that thought in your head when you're making it versus just like gray naked dude or something like that.
Right.
It's just, I don't know,
Yeah.
bad. It's bad news.
I think for animation, it's very similar. Like the first thing that's important to me is, can you animate? And I would and we've talked a lot about this offline, but I'd much rather see a 30-second demo reel that has 3 shots that are amazing than a 3-minute demo reel that has some stuff that's okay, but you're trying to show me a little bit here where you did something different. Don't do that. I'm never going to get to that second and third minute if you're not wowing me in that first minute. And the other thing that I think is important that, especially in game development, maybe not so much if you wanted to go into feature films or something like that, but at this point in time, you have so many opportunities to play around with free game engines that are out there, like Unity or Unreal. And if you have any experience, I mean, one of the things I ask new candidates coming in for an interview is, what kind of game engine experience do you have? Have you ever taken an animation of yours and put it all the way through into a game engine, even just watched it render? You don't have to make a game. You don't have to create the state machine and have the character making all of the right decisions. But play around with the game engine. Get an understanding of what it takes to take your art form and put it in something that's interactive.
To build on that, it is like also research a studio if you can, because I have a very strong opinion of what I think environment artists should be, but it isn't the same for every studio. Like there are some more assembly line where people get to spend time doing materials only, or textures only, or modeling, or UVs, or whatever, and some people love that. I don't think that's the right way to work. I think everyone should be good at understand the whole process, but do research that. And also, like, if you are hitting that well, I feel like I'm at the same level of people showing your work, but not just showing your work, but getting engaged with the modding community. Like you said, you started in that. I worked with my favorite designers I worked with, and a lot of really good environment artists I worked with came through the modding scene, and they just worked on it in their spare time. They didn't make art; they made games. And that's what I want. I want game makers.
Sure.
It makes it a lot easier.
Definitely, and we were talking backstage before we started up here, and also something we mentioned was presentation, and how important just that first impression when you open that portfolio website or whatever it is, how that grabs you, and how concise, clean, well presented is a huge role.
Yeah, don't hide behind your.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, don't hide behind the, don't try and cover.
Right.
If you're putting it on a platform like, say, ArtStation, where everything is presented in the same way, it's much easier for you to see what work your own work is.
You guys are looking at 40, 50 more a day, right? So it needs to be quickly where you can get the idea of what you're looking at.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the last opening we had was over 300 applicants. Before that, mine must have been like 705 or something like that.
Yeah, I had 700 for these ones, last ones.
So it's a lot. So like as cold and evil as it sounds, if you want to bring the lights down just a little bit. But there's first impressions, right? And I mean, the bane of my existence is Wix. I hate Wix so much. You please God, use ArtStation. But beyond that, like you can just tell, like the portfolio site, like the fonts you use, and it's like it's not even like learn graphic design. Just like honestly, a black page with like your title and your work. Just like focus on the work. Don't muddy it up with all of this garbage that's trying to make you stand out. 'Cause it will. It's just in the worst way possible. Yeah.
I also think you need to keep in mind you want to get us or any reviewer as quickly as you can to the cool stuff that you've done. Don't, like for an animation or an animator, I'd rather see, like I said, a shorter reel, and there's some logic to how you should set up your reel, like maybe one of your best shots is first, and you end with a great shot as well.
That was me, I'm just trying to take your thunder.
But I've also received applicants before where there's like 7 links on their Vimeo page, and they expect me to look at each one of these individual animations in their application, and I'm not going to do that. I mean, it's just, we don't, I mean, you got to keep in mind that all of us have demands of production, and yet we still need to grow our team when we're hiring, and we need to spend time, enough time to identify the right candidates to bring in. But if you're not able to catch our attention quick, I'm sorry to say, we're on to the next candidate in that list.
Oh, do me a favor as well. If you just like self-censor, like if you don't feel you're quite ready, just ask your friends, and if they say you're not ready, please don't apply. That's what I say. No, it's like there's people who literally look like they've never been to school who are applying, and it is very different in Europe. In Europe, there's a lot more just people self-censor, and they only send in stuff when they think they're ready. Here you get like 700 candidates, and you get maybe 30 people who you would consider even interviewing. So this myth that there's like tons and tons of people that you're fighting against, it's not true. There are tons of people you're fighting against, but they're not in the fight. You know, there's only there's not that many people who like I will leave a position open for months if I can't find one person. You know, so if you're seeing a place you want to work and the position is open for months, it's because they haven't had a person good enough. There's not like thousands of amazing people just sitting on the sidelines waiting, you know. So just get good enough, and there are jobs. Like, you know, just put that work in.
Gotcha.
And don't be afraid to reapply either. I know I'm sure you guys hear this, but there have been many times where I've seen someone's reel before, and then we have another period where we're growing again, maybe a year later, a year and a half later, and I'm at the same studio, and I see some of the similar shots from the same person, but we'll then bring them in for an interview because they've clearly gotten a lot better. So don't hesitate to continue to reapply to the place you want to work. Don't get discouraged if you don't get in the first time. I mean,
there's plenty of success stories that are like somebody applies, they don't get it the first time, but then like a year down the road or something, you can see like the improvement in the hard work, and you know, you already have them in mind, right? And
for sure,
it works out.
Very cool. So, say I applied, got the job. What can I expect, you know, going into my first day at a job, you know, in a studio?
Sitting with HR and figuring out.
There's a lot of
Perfect.
work. You get
Exactly what I wanted to hear.
Usually get a free lunch, studio tour.
Studio tour, yeah.
We give them shirts, so you get a shirt.
You might get a shirt. You might get a free lunch, do you?
As I mentioned before, though, because we know you're an animator already, we try to get you on a shot that's something useful within like the first 2 days. Whether or not that ultimately makes it into the game, that's kind of your training shot where we're going to walk you through the pipeline with that effort.
But yeah, I build like new starters into the schedule, like give about a week and a half ramp up, and then I probably put an extra week of time for contingency just to make sure that they have. But I pretty much expect a junior to a senior to be effective within the first 2 weeks. At the same rate as everyone else on the team, and if they're not, then I'll figure out why. But
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's there's no like, it's just expect to start working straight away.
Yeah, I have a similar style. Like I'll ramp up like new employees like over time. For us, it's a little bit longer just because we spent so long on our assets apparently. But I mean that's always made clear that we have like you guys deadlines or checkpoints throughout like the first 3 months of someone's employment. You're kind of like setting like the expectations and like what they have to hit, but it's never like, hey, here's your first day, make the most important thing ever. It's like you learn it all on your own. I don't know. So like there's like purposely set up tasks that will teach you like this system or you know how this works, like who you have to talk to, like our best practices and things like that, and just kind of slowly get you used to it. You know.
It also depends on where the production is. Like I for a few years I was contracting, and often when I was contracting, you're brought into the end of the production, or when people are screaming and they need more help. They didn't realize they needed all these people, and in those cases, we were often thrown in the fire right away and animating day one. And you know, if we are in pre-production and we're staffing up our team, we might take a week and not even give them something that's really relevant to the game, but let them play around with the characters and learn the rig and. You know, do your own exploratory animation with the rig. We don't need you to get into anything in the game yet because we want you to learn the pipeline. So I really think it varies depending upon where you are and what studio you're in. And so
Yeah, I think asking for not necessarily a mentor but buddy. There's a thing called buddy system. So if you get your first job, often they'll team you up with somebody who can just show you around the area if it's a new city, or also obviously the studio and get you used to the. And then I like seek out tutorials from new people about the tools, not like
Sure.
How do I model an eyelash with 4 billion tries?
How? Worth it.
Right.
Worth every triangle.
So, yeah, so if you're not getting that tutorial sort of mentoring, half mentoring when you start, yeah, just try and look for it.
Sure.
Because every studio I've worked at that's been there, but I'm assuming that there are studios that don't do that.
Gotcha.
You know, what's something else I didn't bring up? You talked about what you need to do to get a job and get in the industry. I just want to mention this as well. I think specialization is important. I think, you know, I know there are generalist jobs in commercials, and people can do that, but to be perfectly frank, I can't do anything close to what these guys can do in their discipline. And I would argue they probably can't animate like me. So, but there was a time. There was a time years ago in my career, though, where I was building characters. I was rigging characters. But at this point, with the size of productions, if you know you want to be an animator, don't show me your modeling reel. Don't show me your rigging reel. If you want to be a character artist, I don't think they care about your animations. They want to see what your characters are like.
That's super true. Like if I see a character portfolio apply for environment art position, I'm like, well, you know, you clearly don't know anything about the industry because
Because you're a character artist?
you're a character artist.
Wow. No, I mean, I think the idea is that if you show that you can do everything, then like your chances are better, but it's just not true because the effort that you put into all of those other skills, you're just getting weaker. Like you're getting okay at a lot of stuff, but you're not getting great at one thing, right? So, I mean, if you want to have like prop work for characters, then have a character with props, like have a character with a gun or something like that, or something less violent. But you know, just having that mix it lowers your quality like overall.
I think that you know it might be difficult for us because we've been we've been in AAA games for a while. So when I start thinking about it, I start thinking people who are applying to work for me. But you know, again, research the studio because it could be that a generalist, and if you're not getting those AAA jobs where you need to be really focused, you know, that's cool. And also, if you don't know what you want, that's cool as well to play around. But if you're applying for a AAA studio, you know, regardless of if you end up being a generalist, they're going to want specialization. So, you know, AAA is hard. So if you go straight into AAA, expect to be, you know, 100% when you start. And if you're not ready for that and you really don't know what you want, you know, try other studios. There's no shame in doing like some great mobile games or some great, you know, PC games or whatever free games. Like just, you know, experiment and figure it out.
That's a good point.
Because AAA is one way of working. It's not every way.
Absolutely.
You know.
Gotcha. So very cool. I would like to actually open the floor to some audience questions. Wow, there we go. Whoa.
Okay.
Awesome.
We have first of all,
It's either really good or really bad.
I know, right?
So let's have a round of applause first before we do.
Thank you.
And then, so basically we have 3 prizes, right? So I'm going to ask each of you guys if you point to someone in the audience. So the first 3 that you point to will win a prize.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, I see a Sunset Overdrive shirt right there, so I'm gonna pick that one.
Okay. So first question.
They've already got merchandise.
Hi. You guys mentioned the importance of creative problem solving. How does someone get better at that? And can you each give like an example of you or your team members how they've created problem solved something?
Like outside of work, well, I mean, I think really like looking at every project that you're going to take on will have issues with it, or problems, you know, naturally. So I would say if you don't work with somebody that you actually have to deliver assets to, or if there isn't like a design or anything like that on your own work, try to take on projects that have really challenging aspects that you don't normally do. So something with like, if it's character art, like something with hair, something with like, you know, some kind of like effects or something, and you can work on that. Just something that you're not comfortable with and like getting out of that zone. But then for actually working with other people, I mean, I guess my best answer is just kind of like trial and error, like talking, you know, just making like a connection with people and just seeing opportunities that you can take on and like improve in the project.
I have a few pieces of advice. So first is be generous with the amount of time that you're giving yourself to do something. Most artists will underestimate on things they like doing and overestimate on things they don't like doing. I think that's probably true of everybody. But you're like, oh, I want to make Spider-Man's face. That'll take me 2 days, no problem. So you end up causing yourself problems, and then when the problems do come, you don't have time to actually address them. The second aspect is, what are you doing, man? Are you just leaving?
Bye, everybody.
The second aspect is time management. So if you're looking at your own work and you're not having to deal with other people, or even if you are, you just write down what you expect to get done in that time and reassess an interval. Let's say at the start of the week, you write what you want to get done during that week. Midway through the week, you assess what's went wrong. Give yourself really precise estimates on everything you're doing. And then when you get to the end of the week, you assess like what you could have done better, and that will help you figure out the problems or the kind of problems that will come up, and it will prepare you for problem solving that way. I had something else, but I can't remember. It was amazing. It was super important.
I think it's a good point, though, like keeping track of your own time. And I think it's something, like I learned more in like freelancing, but it's helpful, not in freelancing too, but just being able to track yourself and just see where your problems are and see where you actually are suffering, or like maybe where you didn't hit the estimate that you originally set out, and just trying to figure out like tricks to overcome that, right? So whether it's like kit bashing or, using more like base meshes that you have or something like that, right? Like I think you can kind of be more proactive about like your own time and where you're falling short.
I remembered. Intent, and I've said this a bunch of times, but know what you're trying to do. If you know what you're trying to do, you can anticipate the likely problems that you're going to come across. Like if you start, what's your kind of field?
Normally, concept art as well as going more towards like VFX.
Okay, so for example, with concept art, if you know, like if somebody's asking you for a mood piece, you don't have to render everything. If you start building a 3D set and then render it and then start painting over it, you may end up wasting a lot of time where you can't solve the real problem what the mood is. But if you solve the mood in like 10 different moods with just color shifting on photos, you can get that approved early and then iterate on that. So like just front load the problems, try to think about the intent of what you're trying to do and make sure you're front loading solving those early, and the other stuff will be less important as well.
Yeah, I don't need to pile on, but just to throw, I think using a game engine is a good way to just kind of get yourself solving your own problems in general. But when it comes to animation and strictly animating, I think you could step through games that you see that you like and try and mimic what they're doing. Like, can you create an appealing punch without an anticipation? Can you create a 3-hit combo that retains some spatial constraints on how the character moves and where he moves to and from? And you can come up with these arbitrary constraints that are easily identified just by framing through any game that you like and try and build your own content in that way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay,
pick a
Jason, pick somebody.
Oh, Jesus.
No pressure.
Can I gamify this?
Just like that one. Just do like
No,
the
just
immediate-
go.
Okay, so
the closest person to you.
shout the loudest. Okay, whoever
There you
was
go.
here.
Okay.
Oh man, that was easier than asking these questions. So I'm kind of wondering if I know, especially for film, where pre-production is a heavy thing and planning is a lot of planning the story and the shots and everything is very important. So I can see why, like a lot of students, they do a lot of pieces that are kind of concept matching, matching the concept art to the piece. But with games where things become not just locked to just one camera position, but moving all around, how do you guys feel when you see something that's just a one-to-one recreation of a scene versus like more of a elaboration on a concept?
Okay, so for me, I'm interested in, it depends on the rest of the portfolio. So if you're demonstrating like your materials and your assets are all fine, then it's more riffing off the concept. But if you're going to try and do the concept like perfectly, you really need to hit it perfectly, because I will immediately go to look at the imperfections in that, and it's you're setting yourself up for a very difficult task, which often you'll never do in production. Like, spoiler, but every single art book that ever gets made for any game or film, a lot of that content is done after the product is made. It's not like we get these perfect scenes and then we replicate them. A lot of them are reimaginings of stuff that's already in the game. Not to say that the original artist didn't work on the game, but they're not as presentable images. So yeah, the idea of you getting a picture and recreating it in the game, it's never going to happen. But it is useful. It is a useful way of seeing if you understand. Like for me, if the artist understands what's important from the concept, like say for example, it's a color piece, and like in Alla Prima, every piece you do should be trying to explore one specific aspect, composition, color, texture, whatever. And then the artist who's recreating it in 3D then goes and looks at composition. They don't look at the color. Then I show that they don't have any art history or art awareness. So it can be a way of negatively eliminating yourself. So I would say get a bunch of reference concept images, and then showing what you want to use out of each one, like on a style guide for yourself, and then create a scene inspired by that. I think will be less harsh on yourself, but also more fun. And solving problems that other people have solved, it's different in 3D, of course, I suppose. But
Yeah. I mean, I think for character modeling, for me, it's more about capturing like the intent of the concept, right? So a lot of the times in production, our concepts aren't going to be like, like Jason's saying, these like perfect, every little detail's like identified. Like a lot of the times, you're just kind of making it up. So being able to fill in those gaps and make it believable and capture like the essence of the character is really important. But at the same time, I also really like being able to see someone's own unique creation, like what they would do if there were no limits, and like what kind of decisions that they would make. But either way, I think it comes down to like decision making and what you do during production.
Yeah, I think this happens to a lesser extent with animation, but I do think there's merit to studying things that you aspire to do. Like, maybe you're working in 3D and you want to make a character animate like something in a Tex Avery cartoon. Sure, that's great. I think you should do that. And it's okay to go frame by frame and try and mimic exactly what's there. But don't necessarily present that as your own material. Take that, learn from that, and build your own shot with those lessons you've learned. And I could say, conversely, I don't think anyone would ever do this, but if they did, you're insane. Don't ever spend time making a real piece that is rotoscoping human action. Today, with motion capture and other means to get real human action, no one is ever going to ask you to do that. So I just
getting that out there.
Yeah, just don't even bother.
Gotcha.
unless you like wasting your time.
Useless skills.
Yeah.
Cool.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks.
Cool. All right.
Whose go is it now?
And then
Yes.
Brian picks somebody.
I'll pick the gentleman all the way in the back who happens to have the light on him, so he's lucky.
Thank you for taking my question. I notice with Insomniac, they're really good at putting like a fresh face on a really familiar theme or a really familiar concept. Like Spider-Man, for example, there's already so much in terms of like how many games have been made for it already, how many movies have been made for it. How do you find a sort of freedom in creating something that's different than what has been done already with something like Spider-Man or any other project you're working on, while still meeting the expectations of what you should be able to do in the game?
I would say, from my point of view, obviously we can't talk too much about Spider-Man, but it's about having a good relationship with the IP owners, regardless. That could be internally, like the owner of the studio, or externally, with Sony or Marvel or Disney or whoever. But it's kind of a silly answer, I guess, but it's about the passion of the people and the knowledge of the people who are on the project. So like, if there's 40 Spider-Man like nut jobs on the project, then it's going to be him anyway. He accounts for 4, but it's going to be it's going to hit what fans want. So it's kind of, it goes back to the positivity thing. You know, even if you're not into Spider-Man, which who isn't into Spider-Man, but even if you're not into Spider-Man, you know, you should at least be able to see why people like it and then understand that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that Insomniac does differently than other companies I've been at, is the passion. It's not like just Spider-Man, it's like a new IP like Sunset, it's going back to Ratchet, or like any of the things that we've taken on, and it comes down from the top, like Ted, who is our president and CEO, is the most passionate person about the project, right? And it just breeds that same mentality for everybody. Like having transparency, having trust within the team, like Jason's saying, being able to have that good relationship with the IP holder, with your publisher. I think it gets the best, product in the end.
Yeah, and even if it's just the one thing, like the one shot, like you were saying, and it doesn't go past that for some reason, the IP doesn't go very far. But just research, even if you don't love it, just learn to love it, by studying it.
For animation, it's all about research. Like we have to know most of what was in all of our predecessors, so we either don't repeat the same mistakes, or perhaps we can steal ideas. I mean, I think they're not necessarily even stealing. There may be good ideas in the things that have come before, but maybe their execution wasn't quite what you think it could be, and you put your own spin on it.
Liberate ideas.
What's that?
Liberate ideas, not stealing.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, wrong term, yes. But yeah, so again, I think it comes back to at least what I enjoy is like diving into the research of the IP and trying to identify what fans want. And maybe you can personify that in some new feature that you're building in your game.
Yeah, for me with Spider-Man, I just started going back and reading the original,
Same here.
the very first ones. I was like, oh, these are brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to be awful, but they're still great, so yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine you as artists, having that passion for what you're working on is extremely important throughout production. Make sure you're passionate about the product that you're making.
For sure.
Yeah, but also the team, because I think as well, we are very privileged. Like we get to sit and we get to be in the rooms where we're making decisions. A lot of them get crushed, a lot of them get through. But a lot of the rest of the team, the people who are actually implementing it, as some of them in the crowd, don't always see those meetings and discussions. So it's like you need to try to distill that kind of passion about the IP. Like, let's say, what's our version of New York? And give people a bit of that so that they can, make it their own. But yeah, I don't know.
I think it goes back to like the message of like what you're working on, staying focused, right? Like knowing the overall idea of like what we're trying to achieve, like helps get everybody motivated and helps get like the best out of the team.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, we'll hook you up with your prizes for those. Do you guys want to take more questions? You have like 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Right here in front.
This is for Jason. This is a little bit more of a pipeline-specific question.
Sure, yeah.
But when you're designing such a big city like this, how much of the placement of assets and things like that are based on tools that are given to you by the...
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry. How much of the placement of things are done more by the artists or more automated by the engineers?
I would say there is a lot done that's automated, but we're still a whiles away. Like there's always ways to improve. Our city is very real in its organic nature, so we're not like super grid based or anything like that. So there is a limit to the rules, and also our technology's evolved a lot since it was started. So we're sort of living with a bit of hangovers from then. But I would say although we have a game that's playable, at a large level, in a large scale from early on, a lot of that gets replaced by the artists. I would say maybe 80% of it gets replaced at the moment, and we obviously want to do that better. Some places it's more efficient, but yeah, still leaning heavily on the art team. And then the tools, of course, we have really, like for an independent studio, we have a really good level editor, so it helps us just propagate stuff really fast. And there's a lot of assets already made, so it's like pop, 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 pop. It looks fun. I don't know if she can tell you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, we'll take the next one here.
This is more for Gavin as like a character artist, but when you're doing a portfolio with, talk a lot about problem solving, do you want to show, because you guys have to go through them so fast, and there's so many applicants, like how you started, maybe key points during the process of a character or environment, paint overs, different things to show your thought process, your kind of how you're solving problems?
I mean, I honestly, I think it changes, like from reviewer to reviewer. For me personally, like I'm fine seeing the finished product. Like I'll know, like I've seen so much work from so many people that I'll be able to recognize that you went through this process, right? But from an art director's point of view, the majority, like if you're a concept artist or something like that, the majority of their work with an art director is going to be sketches, is going to be like iteration and things like that. It's rarely like the finished product, right? So I think it depends on what you're going for and, you know, like the position you're trying to get. But for me personally, I'm fine with just seeing the finished product, and I'll know, you know, I'll be able to figure out like your trajectory that you went on, kind of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, does anyone have a question for Brian on the
It's okay.
on the animation side?
I'm actually happy with that.
So your
Brian?
hands go down. Wow, people leave.
So, I mean, I practice cinematography too, and I have a filmmaking background. So my main question is, how do you not avoid, but essentially having the player still have agency in the cinematics or camera movement and all that, especially during the QuickTime events that were on in the background? How do you give them the agency to feel like they're playing the game without guiding them too much, if that makes sense?
That's a really good question. I think with QuickTime events, we definitely have structure where we want to make the entry and exit feel seamless and allow the player to have some interactivity. When it comes to story cinematics, where I'm focusing a lot of time these days, I think we really do want to present material to you. That's the whole focus of what we're trying to do. So we're thinking less about, not less about the player, but the sole focus of a story cinematic in every game that anyone plays, aside from the fact that often you want to click through them and have them end, is that it's a moment of story progression. And so there is important information there that we are explicitly focused on trying to convey to you. So I don't know that, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question right.
I think you put a lot more thought than your like in terms of like the timing of, I've just seen what they do, so it's pretty amazing, and I don't really understand.
So build me up, Jason.
So basically, he just like no. So it's to do a lot. Of what I've seen is the editing, and letting and teaching the player rules for when to expect something to happen, and also the timing of like how much time you have to realize something's on screen, where you put it, where you put the interactions on screen, and are they empowering? Because it could be a case of, well, why is this QT at all? Could it just be a cinematic? And I don't really know how you make the decisions, but they're very satisfying. So
well, actually, that's a good point. So we do spend a lot of time looking at a cinematic sequence and trying to identify what can we allow the player to do, because we know that, my ideal, even though I like visual storytelling and cinematography and it's a lot of fun, I think ideally we all know that we'd be better off if the player can experience all of the things that we show you in an interactive manner. So when it comes to actions you see here, whether or not it's a QTE, we're really trying our best to make it feel like you're still piloting that moment and you have full control. So that will go into how quickly we go in and out of a cinematic, or how much interaction we provide, where that is on screen, as Jason pointed out.
And there's some great stuff which we can't talk about at all of cinematics that go into gameplay, and they're basically it's seamless. And even I've watched some of them, and you'll see them eventually. It's just like I'm playing this. It's really, really it's very clever. So yeah.
What's interesting is you wouldn't think about it, but we spend an inordinate amount of time on the entry and exit of a cinematic. Certainly the meat of it is important, but to get that seamless effect, to get the player to feel connected throughout is important, and it's forever challenging for us. We spend probably too much time on the handoff, as we put it, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we have time for one last question. I'm going to take one from the back over here. Well, who was on this side? Okay, I'm going to, sorry. It's so hard. There's so many.
So many.
What is the ratio of 2D and 3D art that usually goes into a project? Like, is it, obviously most of the finished projects is 3D, but like, is it truly only concept that is 2D, or is there more than that?
Well, I mean, we've got like graphic design and stuff too in a project. So if you get like an open world, you'll have like ads or graffiti and like brands that you have to make up, stuff like that. I think it really depends on the project. For like open world, you probably have more of that.
With shaders and textures and so forth.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's like textures and stuff too. If, you know, you're into that kind of thing.
Color,
Yeah, there's
text
there-
as well. Yeah.
There's color, yeah, there's definitely color. But yeah, I mean, really, at least in my experience, like the concept has been kind of, it's always like a smaller team. It's like one or two, you know. But the projects I've been on really haven't had like a ton of need for concept, I guess, or you know, it's not like a huge demand.
Yeah. Are you asking because you do 2D, or what's?
I just started the 3-year program here. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, like in terms of the amount of people who and the amount of content that's generated for a project, it's very small amount is 2D.
I think it depends, though. I mean, the short period of time while I worked for Google, we had, well, I don't know that this was great for our economy. The sole focus of the project was there was like 12 of us at Google, and we built this. It was their effort to make a video game, which the economy collapsed and that ended. But our production was all overseas. It was in Shanghai, Beijing, and Mumbai.
Yep.
So we spent months on pre-production. We had books, you know, hundreds of pages thick with character turns, every object turn, even to the level of thumbnails for the animations that I wanted. So it really depends on the project and how that project is being built. I know that with television animation, a lot of 2D animation these days, while it's not drawn here in the States, they're approaching it with that process. The weight on the stateside team is in pre-production and 2D planning and trying to identify everything possible and every possible problem up front on paper so they can hand that off to a vendor and have them create everything they need.
I think, sorry, I was more thinking about the content in the game. In terms of preparing with outsource, especially, there is a ton of content. In terms of the actual painting of it, maybe not as much as you'd think, because a lot of it, when you're dealing with these vendors abroad, there are big Bibles with lots of words. I know Horizon had a huge outsource budget, and they had like, you know, thousands of page Bibles for every asset, and a very small, considering the scope of the game, a small internal team. So it can really depend on the studio, yeah, absolutely. But if you want to get a job, 3D is it's easier to get a job with 3D. I think it's very competitive working 2D, as you know, as your administrator.
Well, a lot of our 2D stuff is like kind of contract too, right? Like you can do like freelance like concept work or like illustration, and not necessarily be like an internal like member of the team. So I think it's just kind of transitioned. At least for us, it's transitioned a bit into that direction.
Yeah, I found a lot of the 2D, like really strict 2D concept artists to not get involved in the game design as much as well. Sort of more live in the canvas, which can be really problematic because you're solving problems for a visual image, not for the game, as we've talked about. So if you are looking at getting into concept for games, you sculpt and, you know, mess around in 3D and it's not, there's no cheats. You know, the fastest solution is the best solution if it's the right solution.
Thank you.
Okay, that was awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Did it.
I'm so sorry to those who didn't get to ask a question, but are you guys sticking around for a little while after?
Yeah,
You'll be able
sure,
to you'll be able to come chat with them, hopefully.
Get out.
I think, Ray, did you have one final question?
Did I have a final question? Yes, I just wanted to just get some final thoughts from you guys. You know, we've talked about communication, teamwork, production, you know, and again, you know, how to bridge that gap between game artists and game designers. Do you have any final thoughts on that?
Jason?
Yeah, okay. Come back to me. I zoned out there for a second.
Let's see. I think if you're in the games industry long enough, you will begin to think like a designer. You won't be able to help it. And I think I'm not going to say that I can do everything our designers do. We have a lot of talented people. But at this point, I feel like I approach a feature with my understanding of how this might be designed or how we might need to build something. So I think, frankly, understanding game design as an artist is not a bad thing to look into. Even if you don't want to be a designer specifically, to understand how they think, understand what their approach to a feature might be is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think like as a character artist, just being able to like sculpt and like paint textures and things like that, it's just part of the equation. And as soon as you start learning like the purpose and like the function of the work that you're creating you'll become a better artist, right? So you're learning to make better decisions. You're learning to understand where you should devote your time to because of like how your character is going to be seen in game. So even if you're not thinking of the next GTA or some awesome game idea in your head, if you're thinking about how your work is going to be used, you'll end up being a better artist for sure.
For me, the key to thinking like a game designer compared to being a game artist or a game developer is, so we talked about intent. So you've got to understand your intent, right? That's fair enough. That's relatively easy, but the next phase is iterating towards that intent, which is something that's learned from UX. So you have to know what your starting point is and where you want to be, and every decision you make, is it getting you closer or further away from where you want to be. Then that's the real skill of design. So when you're helping design, always remember that there are going to be places where it starts to go off, but may come back and work with design to help iterate that. I think methodology that's like learned from, like I've worked with a lot of great designers and artists who've gone through QA, and learning that methodology of how to approach work is like super useful. Don't snuff it because it's super good, and again, like it will make you a better artist if you have good methodology. And other people can then also use your files and your work. If you work the right way, you can give it to someone else to work with. If you work your own way, then people go, when they look at your files, so yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for being here tonight.